Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Panel Session 8. Former Secretaries of Defense assess the state of our national defense. Where we are and where do we need to go? Please welcome Barbara Starr, CNN Pentagon correspondent.
I guess they're not going to introduce us.
The Vice President of the United States, and Leon Panetta. We're taking a picture. He wants to take a
You all know the other two guys.
All right, here we go.
We're taking a little group picture, much against my will. All right, and that'll set the stage for this session because I have standing room only, and I guarantee nobody's here to hear what I have to think. So we're going to have a very, very interesting session, I suspect. And unlike most of these that I do, this really is special to me because I do, as a very long time, Pentagon correspondent, I know both of these men, Secretary Cheney, and he's given me permission to call him Secretary Cheney. He promised me he didn't mind, because that's how I know him. The Vice President was the first Defense Secretary I ever covered. Secretary Panetta was the first one I ever had to sit in the edit bay and take out when he moved to Italian in his sound bites for when he was upset about something, because you really couldn't put that on TV. You're never really too sure what he was saying. I don't really think we need to go through introductions. If you don't know who they are, you probably are, as somebody said earlier, you're probably in the wrong place. But I'm going to start with a couple of anecdotes, because I'm taking with two former House members as well, I'm taking the prerogative of the chair. So we have everybody up there too, hi. One of the things about defense secretaries, when you cover the Pentagon and all 17 and a half miles of corridors in the Pentagon, you keep an eye out because you never know when they're going to leave their office and go walking around. And both of these gentlemen had a long history of doing it. Secretary Gates, Secretary Hagel also. Secretary Rumsfeld. Secretary Rumsfeld showed up in the cafeteria to eat lunch. Secretary Gates would walk around wherever he felt like it as a former CIA director. And Secretary Hagel would walk around and either stop tourists or stop young enlisted troops. And he'd stop with young enlisted troops in the hallway and just start talking to them and ask them what they did. Secretary Cheney would be found walking outside on his own, getting some fresh air because he wanted to. And he was also quite well known for just turning up in hallways where you didn't really expect him. So one day, as a very young cub reporter, I found him I came across him in a corridor, Army corridor. And I believe you were with Don Atwood, the Deputy Defense Secretary, and they were walking around. I'm like, I think they're lost. There's just no way he really means to be in this corridor. So what do? Do you go up to Defense Secretary and say, sir, are you lost? But as a young cub reporter, it gave me a chance to talk to him. So I went up to him and said, are you lost? And then he was so gracious, and he told me the office he was looking for, turned him around, said, actually, sir, you want to go that way. But, get out, walk around. Secretary Panetta, same thing, but I want to share a different anecdote. He would bring the late, dearly departed Bravo, his golden retriever, to the building. And so one day they turned up in the press area to come visit the press, Bravo, the secretary, and the security detail. And we're all having a nice conversation, but it became very apparent Bravo was ready to leave and go back. Bravo had had enough. So Bravo turns around and walks out of the press room. This is the dog. The dog knows exactly where the office is. He's not lost. So Bravo turns around and this golden retriever padding down the hallway, tail waving. He knows exactly where he's going, followed by the secretary keeping up with Bravo, followed by the secretary's security detail. So kind of goes to that old adage in Washington, get a dog. So I think the Pentagon press corps is going to be very interested to see where General Mattis, if confirmed, turns up in the building. And so that takes us, I think to probably what everybody's interested in, the thoughts from both of you on the first and perhaps most immediate question. So we now have General James Mattis as the president-elect's nominee to become Secretary of Defense. I don't think there's anyone who questions General Mattis's capabilities. But you're both previous members of the House. Let me start with you, Secretary Cheney. Your views on a waiver for a general, a member of the military, to serve as Secretary of Defense. What are your thoughts on this? And both of you, I want to ask you to address this because it's General Mattis, are we all saying, great, let's go ahead? Or are there issues to reflect upon and think about why this country has that law, that there is civilian control and an active duty military person should be out of the military for a number of years before they lead the armed services? What are your thoughts about this?
Well, first of all, I think Jim Mattis is a great appointment. I would wholeheartedly endorse his selection. The question of passing a waiver, of course, it's a serious matter. We believe very deeply in the whole notion of civilian control. And it was set up in such a way that we're not going to move people who are on active duty in the military as a general and move them into that slot. It's always going to be a civilian. Or if it's former military within 7 years, they've got to have a waiver. We've only done that once in our history, of course, and that was with George Marshall. Just a quick story with respect to George Marshall. When I was sworn in as secretary, Jim Forrestal's picture was behind my desk in the office. And as the first Secretary of Defense, I took it down. I didn't want to come to the same end he did. And sorry, shouldn't say that. But
There's only a few TV cameras.
Right, and I put George Marshall up in his place, just because of my respect and admiration for what he'd done, for the service he'd rendered. He was a special case, obviously. So I don't think we've abused the privilege of a waiver. I think it is appropriate in this case, and I would support it.
I had, by the way, kept George Marshall up behind my desk, plus Ike. We had both of them were behind my desk, and great tribute to the leadership that was there at the Defense Department. Look, I think Jim Mattis is, having worked for me as CENTCOM commander, is a great soldier, somebody who really understands defense, is very thoughtful, and I too am very pleased with the appointment of Jim Mattis to that position. I do believe, obviously, in the rule of civilian control, and I think that is important because you always want a secretary who understands military policy, but also understands kind of the Congress, the American people, relates to the issues that the president has to deal with, and brings all of that into the context of defense policy. So I don't view a military background as disqualifying for Secretary of Defense. And we have this ability now to provide the waiver. And I guess my view would be, in the course of providing the waiver, the Congress is going to have hearings, and I think that would be an opportunity to make sure that Jim, and I think Jim does understand this, understands the role that he has to perform, certainly on the civilian side as well as on the military side. And that's an opportunity to basically make sure that Jim understands that role as well. So I'm pretty confident that in the end, that the Congress will provide the waiver, and that Jim Mattis will be our next Secretary of Defense.
Is the inclination of Congress to move towards this waiver, and there's all indications that they will, is it because it's Mattis, because he is, by all accounts, one of the most respected generals of this era? Does it have more to do with him in particular than the issue of a waiver?
Well, I don't think there's any question that that people have a tremendous amount of respect for Jim Mattis, and that obviously is an incentive. At the same time, who the hell are we kidding? 7 years? Where the hell did that come from? Somebody figured that in 7 years, you suddenly become a civilian. I guess that after 7 years, there's no magic here. The reality is that they built that into the law, and now we're having to deal with that. So, but I think there's a greater willingness for the Congress, obviously, to provide that waiver with somebody like Jim Mattis. It might not be the case if it were somebody else. That's the nature of politics.
So let me, please.
Just respond to. I think we're living in a special time, and I think there are special problems and obligations that this administration is going to have going forward. And I find them, especially important to have somebody with Jim Mattis's background. He's a great Marine. He's got the experience to prove it. He's got a perspective, I think, on what needs to be done with respect to the military and the Defense Department that somebody else without his background might not bring to it. And so I really think, because of the circumstances we find ourselves in terms of threat, in terms of our capability, in terms of the task that's before the next secretary, it's especially appropriate to have somebody with his experience. He's been there. He's been out on the point of the spear. He's had to command troops in combat. I think that's not a bad experience for somebody who's going to serve in that post.
So you just said that the new administration will have special problems and obligations they must deal with. Let's have both of you starting with you, sir, drill down on this a bit more. What are the special problems and obligations that you see topping the list for the Trump administration?
Well, I'm sure it's been discussed before this session during the course of the conference. But if I look at what's going on in the world out there, I look at the increasing threats, Russian, Chinese, North Korean, Iran, the problems with respect to ISIS and the terrorism in the Middle East. I think the challenges are very great, and I think we have, unfortunately, over the course of the last many years, done serious damage to our capabilities to be able to meet those threats. That what's happened with respect to the budget, the sequester process, the fact that we no longer build defense budgets based on the threat, we build it based on the sequester, which is outrageous, frankly. And it was deemed to be outrageous when it was put in place, on the supposition that it was so bad it would never survive. And lo and behold, everybody's sort of gotten comfortable with it. And I don't mean to be partisan in my comments, but I think the last 8 years, the military has suffered egregiously because of the circumstances we have, and that I love the General Dunford and his comments at noon today, but I think that there are responsibilities for what's happened. I'm very worried about the circumstances we find ourselves in, and I think, frankly, a good part of the burden falls on the political side of the House, not the military side of the House. So we haven't kept up our share of the bargain in terms of providing the support and resources the military needs to do the job we expect them to do for us.
I think to follow up on what Dick said, I think we're living with a lot of very dangerous flashpoints in the world. Probably more instability and flashpoints than we've seen since the end of World War II. And you know the full spectrum. You've discussed it, whether it's ISIS or terrorism, whether it's collapsed states in the Middle East, whether it's Iran, whether it's North Korea, whether it's Russia, whether it's China, whether it's the whole area of cyber warfare that we've entered into. We are dealing with a whole series of potential threats. I'm reminded of the period, in just before World War I, when there were a number of flashpoints in the world at that time. related to some of the same challenges that we're facing now: terrorism, failed states, territorial disputes, fragile alliances, all of that, and actually failed leadership, the inability to have to deal with those challenges. And so any one of those things, the failure to deal with those created the result of World War I. We're living in that period where there are a lot of flashpoints, and a new administration is going to have to look at that kind of world and obviously define policy that we need in order to deal with that, but then develop the defense policy to confront that kind of world. And the biggest problem right now is that, in line with what Dick said, you cannot have a strong defense. You can talk about all the things you want to do in terms of the defense budget, but the reality is you can't do any of that unless Congress agrees to a budget and provides some certainty as to where the hell we're going. You can't operate a defense establishment based on a CR. You can't, try to develop defense planning for the future when you're operating with the threat of sequester and the possibility that you're going to have to slash a whole amount of spending from the defense budget. It's dysfunctional right now. And so the ultimate challenge is going to have to be able to get a budget, to have Congress move forward and do what should have been done a long time ago. It was done in the time when Dick was secretary. It was done in the time when we were both in the Congress. There was an ability of both Republicans and Democrats to sit down and do a budget. And you got to put everything on the table. You can't just pretend that you can solve the budget problem by just doing discretionary spending. That's not going to solve it when 2/3 of federal spending is wrapped up in entitlements. So you got to put everything on the table, and that's what I went through. We did it in the Reagan administration. We did it in the Bush administration. Bill Clinton developed a budget that included all of those areas, and the result was we got a balanced budget. But more importantly, we had a certain budget. We had a budget for 5 years where you knew, what you were dealing with, and you could plan. Somehow we've got to get back to that, because all of the things that everybody's saying about all the great things that are going to happen on defense, all of the things that are going to happen with weapon systems, all of the things that are going to happen with force structure, none of that's going to happen if you don't get a budget put in place that you can plan on.
So, Secretary Cheney, let's drill down on take this one step further, because all of this dysfunctionality comes, as you just said, as the threats are growing. Mm-hmm. And none of it's getting any better. I don't think we see anywhere where things are getting much better.
I think I'd share that view.
So the new administration comes in, has to solve the budget problem, but 1201 Inauguration Day, things could happen. Hopefully not, but things can happen, bad things. So walk around the world a little bit here in your assessment and what your advice would be on and then you as well, Secretary Panetta. Let's start potentially with sort of the three biggies, North Korea, Iran, and Russia. North Korea, all indications are they're moving ahead with their nuclear program. What is your advice to a new administration about what to do about that?
Well, I think it's important to be honest and direct in terms of our current status. If you look at North Korea, we've lived in a world where there have been nuclear weapons in Russia and nuclear weapons in China, but they are, for the most part, we obviously don't agree on a lot of things, but they're governed by rational people. Can't say that about North Korea. The proposition we're faced with now is the very real possibility that North Korea will be armed with nuclear weapons, and that they will also have the ballistic missile capability to be able to deliver those on the United States, right here at home, continental United States. That's a very scary process and prospect. We've got to, I think, spend all of the effort we can persuading the Chinese to join the effort to shut them down, But I don't think we can bet the farm on that, and I think we need to be very, very aggressive about building and deploying defenses against those systems. And that includes the ability to take out on launch systems coming out of North Korea. That we need to deploy the THAAD system in South Korea. I believe the South Koreans have now agreed to it. Provide that kind of capability to Japan. We need to be prepared to station ships offshore with that kind of capability. We're going to have to be aggressive about it. The Chinese aren't going to like it, but they're going to have to live with it unless they're prepared to join up in and actually make progress against the North Korean threat. It's very, very real. I think I worry not only about their capabilities from the standpoint of a government with those resources. I always remember the day that Meyer Dagan, the head of the Mossad, walked into my office in the West Wing and started throwing down colored photographs of the North Korean-built nuclear reactor at Al-Kabar in the eastern Syria desert in the spring of '07. And the North Koreans were out there providing nuclear capability to one of the worst terror-sponsoring states in the world, Syria. Thank goodness the Israelis took it out, or it would have ended up inside the caliphate once it was established. So it's very serious business, and the North Koreans are to be concerned about for many reasons, but those are two of them.
Secretary Panetta, North Korea, I mean, you've certainly been aware of the intelligence all the way along. What's your assessment on how soon they could put all the pieces together, a warhead, a missile, and perhaps either an intercontinental or mobile launch system?
Look, they have the capabilities to begin the process of putting it together. I think within the near future. I mean, as to when and where, obviously it depends. But the fact is, they're developing intercontinental ballistic missiles. They're testing them. We think it's not too long before they have that capability, if they don't have it now. They've got nuclear weapons. They're developing mobile missile systems. They're trying to develop missile systems on submarines. So they're trying to develop the delivery capability for the nuclear weapons. And I think it's a very real threat with a very unpredictable leader. I mean, we don't know what this guy is going to do. There's no certainty here. I mean, the only guy he seems to get along with is Dennis Rodman, for God's sakes. So you don't know. You don't know what's going to happen with that kind of unpredictable leader. And so it is really important to continue to strengthen our relationship in that region. We have a strong defense relationship with the Japanese. We have a strong relationship with South Korea. We've got 25,000 troops still in South Korea. We need to build up their capabilities in order to confront North Korea. We've got to develop, I think, a relationship with other countries as well in the Asia-Pacific region in order to develop a really strong coalition. We've got to put pressure on the Chinese. Dick is right. China has the ability to be able to influence North Korea. They don't like what's going on in North Korea, but they also want to keep them friendly. But China has to put additional pressure on them to be able to move in a better direction. The end result is that, look, we've had 60 years since that war came to an end. The fact that we have built up our capabilities, the fact that we built a strong defense system in South Korea, the fact that we've made very clear that we would take action to go against North Korea if they tried anything, has in many ways prevented a war in that area. We need to send the same signals that, if they decide to do something drastic, that we are prepared to take action against North Korea. You've got to draw that line so that they understand it's there.
For both of you, though, that's very interesting. That has been the U.S. message. The U.S. will respond. There will be no question about that. But that has been a very carefully shaped, very diplomatically transmitted message, very controlled message from any U.S. administration. Candidly, are you concerned that the Trump administration, at least in the opening weeks or months, could, we'll say inadvertently, be perhaps too casual in its language? Is this so serious now that they must be very careful how they continue to communicate U.S. policy in the Pacific on this matter?
Well, it's one of the reasons I think having a man like General Mattis on board as Secretary of Defense to focus on those threats. He fully understands these kinds of things. I agreed with him, for example, when he differed with the Obama administration and wanted to use military force against the Iranians in their program. The one thing that has worked in terms of stopping nuclear proliferation has been military force or the threat of it. And that's true going back to 1981 when the Israelis took out the Iraqi reactor at Osirik outside Baghdad. When we took out the program that existed in 91 with respect to Desert Storm. When we took down Saddam Hussein in 03, we shut down any possibility that he'd go forward with the program. But one of the real benefits was Muammar Gaddafi got religion. And 5 days after we captured Saddam, he announced he was going to surrender his nuclear materials to us, and he did. What works is military force or the threat of military force, and we need to be thinking in those terms with respect to North Korea, not some pie-in-the-sky diplomacy, such as, frankly, I think the administration's negotiated settlement with the Iranians.
Do you think the threat of military force should be more public, more stepped up?
Well, you know, you asked about the Trump administration approach to that. I don't think anybody knows what the hell the approach is going to be at this point. And, you know, there are a lot of questions. We don't know, frankly, which Donald Trump is going to enter the Oval Office, whether it's the tweeting Donald Trump or the, you know, the reality TV Donald Trump, or whether it's the businessman Trump, who seems to be much more willing to engage in the realities that we have to deal with. I'm pleased that he appointed somebody like Jim Mattis, because I think that can be an important key to being able to make some of the right decisions. I hope he appoints somebody who's Secretary of State, who understands the world and who understands the issues that play out in our world. And you know, if he does that, then obviously he'll have some experience there to try to guide him, because these issues are going to break the day he walks in the Oval Office. You know, every president I've seen in my time who's walked in the Oval Office, I don't care how experienced they are, when they saw the awesome responsibility the President of the United States has walking into the Oval Office, it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. And I think it's going to be true when he enters the Oval Office. He's facing an awful lot of responsibility. He's going to have some good people who are going to have to provide some guidance, and I think, you know, as a result, exercise some care, because the problem is presidents' words count. You know, this is not something where you can just say whatever the hell you think and expect that you could change your mind the next day and say, well, I didn't mean that. You know, when you're dealing with foreign policy and you're dealing with countries abroad, your words count. And so I guess, you know, my hope and my prayer is that, you know, he'll have a willingness to work with people that understand these issues and be able to provide the kind of defined policy we're going to need in order to protect this country in a very dangerous world.
Well, and one of the most important things he can do is exactly the opposite of what his predecessor did with respect to Iran and nuclear weapons. Don't make the mistakes that the situation that he is inheriting from the Obama administration represented with respect to our status in the world, the capabilities of our forces, the belief on the part, I think, of many of our friends and allies that they can no longer trust the United States or count on our guarantees. I think we need to make major progress in reversing Obama policies, and that's not a bad place for President Trump to start.
But Secretary Cheney, Mr. Vice President, you are someone who has a long history of being very precise in your words, in your thinking, and your analysis. I'm not aware of any time you've ever said anything very casually.
Oh, now, Barbara.
At least I can't recall. Other than that Air Force general you fired. Well, that's another story that we'll get to later. Come on, let's hear it. What's your, you hear this casual language. And when I say that, don't go out tweeting that I'm anti this or anti that. The language of tweets is not necessarily as nuanced and contextual as U.S. foreign policy is. I think that is something we can all agree on. So when you see this, seriously, what concerns does it cause you if you were sitting with him and could give him some advice about all of this, about language, about meaning of words? What would your advice be?
Well, first of all, I'm not sitting with him.
Would you if asked?
Would I have asked? Certainly.
Okay.
If the President of the United States asked for advice, I would have been happy to advise Barack Obama, but he never asked me.
So again, language and words. See, man never says anything casual.
No, I think you do need to be careful, but he'll learn as he goes along. And I think he is bringing some good people with him. I am a big fan of Mike Pence. I know Mike well from his 12 years in the House. And I think he's a great choice as vice president. He's going to play a major role. I think Mr. Trump is taking very, very seriously the job he's got now, staffing up the administration. And so I think one of the reasons people get so concerned about the tweets is it's sort of a way around the press. He doesn't have to rely upon he's got his modern era, modern technology. He's at the point where we don't need you guys anymore. I apologize.
Do you see any risks in that? Do you see risk? The question I asked, which none of you could hear because you're all laughing. Do you see risk in that? It's all about, you are two of the men who know more than anybody who has stepped foot inside Washington. It's all about risk.
Well, and you do have to be careful, and there was a time when I made a mistake. I'd been secretary for about a week or 10 days back in '89, and I was asked by a reporter how I felt about Mr. Gorbachev. And I said nice things about him, but then I went on to say that I thought ultimately he would fail, and he would be replaced by a regime a lot more like the old Soviet leadership than Gorbachev had. One of the first calls I got was from my friend Jim Baker over at the State Department, who said, "Cheney, you're out of your lane." And he was right, and I learned my lesson. I was right. I was just a few years ahead of time. So
let's talk about the Russians.
You would have tweeted that today.
yeah, right, exactly. There you go. Where's my Twitter?
Are you on Twitter?
I don't know how to do it.
Well, this, of course, is the perfect segue into the Russians. So, both of you, if you were sitting down with Vladimir Putin, would you trust him right now? Or what level of trust on what issues could you have in him? Secretary Panetta, let's start with you.
Well, look, you don't trust Putin. You have to deal with Putin. And Putin has his objectives. There's not a lot of mystery here. I think Putin is somebody who really does want to restore the old Soviet Union and try to obviously restore strength to Russia. And that's his goal, and that's what he's after. And I think it's really important when you're dealing with Putin to deal with him from strength. You have to deal with somebody like that from strength. If he senses weakness, and he sensed weakness, he'll take advantage of it. And that's what he's done in the Crimea. That's what he's done in the Ukraine. That's what he's done in Syria. That's what he's doing with all of this hacking business, is he's taking advantage of it. And I think it raises real concerns about somebody like Putin, going into an Estonia or going into another country because he feels like he may have a license to do that. So in order to deal with that, you have to make very clear to him what the lines are, and that the United States will not stand by and allow him to go into another country. That we will have a strong NATO alliance. We will work together, and we will respond in kind if in fact that happens. Make that very clear. Make very clear that we're going to maintain a presence in that part of the world. Make very clear that we have objectives about our interests, and we're going to achieve those objectives. That's what it's all about. Those are the kinds of signals I think that you have to send to a Putin so that he understands where the lines are. And then, yeah, can you deal with him? Of course you can deal with him. You can talk with him and try to negotiate and deal with some of the challenges that we face and see if you can make some progress. But you can't do that from a position of weakness. You have to do it from a position of strength.
So what would have been the answer in your mind? Crimea, Eastern Ukraine. Do you go to war over Russian moves into Crimea in Eastern Ukraine? How do you demonstrate that strength?
Well, I think there's no question but what Mr. Putin is a very dangerous man. He doesn't even have a Politburo he has to report into like many of his predecessors did. I think he has aspirations to restore as much as he can of the old Soviet empire. I always remember that when the Soviet Union went out of business, the Cold War ended, Europe was reunited, that he described that as one of the disasters of the 20th century ever to befall mankind. So I think he clearly has aspirations to take advantage of weakness, and I think he's perceived weakness in the United States in recent years. I worry that it doesn't even require necessarily military action. Certainly that threat is there, but I think he'd like very much, for example, to undermine NATO, to use his capacity, for example, to influence politics internally with respect to the Baltics. There are pro-Russian parties in those various states. He can easily provide financial support for them and create domestic political opposition. He can threaten to cut off the energy supplies to the Baltics. They're 100% dependent upon Russia for gas, natural gas. He can create a crisis, I think, in terms of simply threatening, if you will, for example, to perhaps to be even more active and more hostile unless the Baltics withdraw from NATO. And the question is, how does NATO respond to that? So I think we have to be very careful about it. I think if he sees weakness, he'll act on it. And my belief is that he's perceived weakness in recent years. I think it was a mistake, for example, for us to cancel the anti-ballistic missile system that we'd started to deploy in Poland and the Czech Republic, that he believes, given the fact that we've operated, for example, with pretty dramatic reduction in our nuclear capability, we haven't responded to what the Russians are doing and the Chinese to upgrade their capabilities. We've operated on the basis that if we just de-emphasize our reliance on our nuclear capability, the North Koreans and the Iranians obviously won't go forward and develop theirs, which is obviously a flawed concept. That's been the concept I felt that President Obama has adhered to.
So what is your view then, again, do you have any concerns, or what are your concerns, that the president-elect has been publicly favorable towards Vladimir Putin and may want to change his language on that?
Well, I'm not here today to advise Mr. Trump in terms of how he changes his language. I've expressed my views. I believe Putin's a very dangerous figure. I believe the signals he's received from the U.S. indicate weakness. I believe our friends in Europe are very nervous about the degree to which the United States is truly committed to NATO. I think you've got to reinforce that degree of commitments. You've got to prepare to reverse course on the defense budget. You've got to rebuild the U.S. military and reassert our responsibilities and our leadership role in the world. That's important both to our allies, but it's also important to our adversaries like Mr. Trump and the Russians.
Secretary Panetta, what are your views? I think there is no question there has been publicly repeated favorable language about Mr. Putin by the president-elect. Do you think this could be sending the wrong signal or not the signal that there should be down the road to the world and especially to Putin himself?
Well, obviously I've been concerned about that because it creates an impression that somehow we are not going to be strong with regards to NATO. We're not going to be strong with regards to dealing with Assad. We're not going to be strong with regards to dealing with ISIS, and that concerns me because, as I said, those are words during the campaign. We all understand they're words in the campaign, but the people abroad don't understand that it's just a campaign and may misread the messages that are being provided. Now, having said that, I'm a little more encouraged, by kind of his recent attitudes with regards to, dealing with NATO, and dealing with some of the other issues that we have to confront in the world, and that he's beginning to understand that all of these things have implications. So, I guess, like Dick, I have a feeling that once an individual enters the Oval Office and enters the responsibilities of the president, that you're just going to be a hell of a lot more careful about how you deal with the issues. I hope that's the case. I hope that's the case. May not be, but I hope that's the case because the reality is this is a dangerous world. It's a very dangerous world. We're dealing with a lot of these flashpoints, and very frankly, the relationship with regards to Russia is one of those that is extremely important in terms of the security of the world. And our continuing to exercise strong world leadership that makes very clear to the Russians, and this is something for the United States that goes back to the Truman Doctrine. It was Harry Truman who made the decision when Russia was trying to influence other countries and walking into Greece and walking into other countries, that the Truman Doctrine was not going to allow that to happen. And it was what led to NATO, and it's what led to the Marshall Plan, because we were willing to draw lines on Russia. And very frankly, drawing those lines is, I think, what ultimately led to the failure of the Soviet Union. We've got to continue to do that with regards to the Russia of today, is to make clear where those lines are. Yes, we'll deal with them. Yes, we'll talk about issues that concern both of us and try to see if we can develop areas of agreement. But at the same time, we've just got to make very clear that there are lines that we are not going to allow them to cross. I think that's the way you deal with Putin.
So go back for a minute, Secretary Cheney, to Iran. You had mentioned, that historically General Mattis had been someone discussing the notion of military action against Iran's nuclear program. A lot of people analyze or say that if the new administration leaves the Iran nuclear deal, pulls back and no longer agrees to it, that this puts a military option for Iran's nuclear program back on the table because they'll restart their nuclear effort. Is it, at this point, are we so far down the road on the nuclear agreement that you cannot pull back without Iran then going to resume its program, and the US and the Israelis have to consider military options against it? Is it too late to pull out of it? Is the risk of an Iranian restart too great at this point?
Well, Barbara, my point was with respect to General Mattis, and I have not discussed it with him, I don't have a personal relationship with him, But the press reports at the time that he left his job as CENTCOM commander was that he disagreed with the Obama administration's policy on Iran. I also disagreed with the Obama administration policy on Iran. But what I worry about is I think if we look at the long-term consequences of the choice that President Obama made, we've paid already a significant price. Again, if you come back to my belief that the things that have worked to retard or stop nuclear proliferation have been military action or the threat of military action, that when President Obama took military action off the table, and he had a pattern, I believe, that when there was a crisis, the first thing that he'd announce was what he wasn't going to do, and this was one of them. And we ended up in a situation where military is no longer a possibility. And from that point on, the Iranians have had their way with respect to using the first negotiations or the agreement now to get just about anything they wanted. Billions of dollars, sanctions lifted, UN sanctions, etc. Even to the point where when it was time, for example, for the president to act on the red line he drew for Syria, if they used gas and chemical weapons against their people, he threatened then to take action. When the chips were down and the Syrians violated that red line, he backed off. I personally believe, and there's been some speculation, the reason he backed off was because the Iranians threatened the nuclear deal and the nuclear negotiations. So there's a point now where they're able to influence U.S. policy throughout the Middle East, and their lever is, in fact, that nuclear agreement that
and that's why I asked.
Entered into. So
is it too late to do something about it?
I don't think it is too late. You're going to have to do reverse course, and I'd want to send a strong signal that I would want to send a strong signal that the military option is very much there, and that it's on the table. And I would not begin by, first of all, saying there's no military option with respect to Iran. We've got the whole question of whether or not they're in compliance. Most people believe they aren't. And I think that you need to be prepared to reverse course with respect to the policies the Obama administration pursued on Iran. The whole change in terms of our relationship with our friends in that part of the world, the Egyptians, the Saudis, the Emirates, the Israelis, turning our back on our historic relations with them in order to suck up to the Iranians and get an agreement there. It was a major blow, I think, to the U.S. policy in that part of the world.
So Secretary Panetta, those of us who were there while you were secretary know that you looked at this question very carefully of what it would take to do a military strike against Iran's nuclear program. Let's say it did come to that. Walk us through that scenario again. The problems you face getting there, if the Israelis decide to go ahead unilaterally, would the Israelis even tell us? The challenges of going through that airspace, that air defense corridor off Iran's coast. And what we even know about the target set?
Well, let's without getting into classified areas, I think it's fair to say that we had developed a military plan, if necessary, to take military action against Iran, and that it was, was a well thought out plan and developed, I think, the kind of approaches that would have been very effective if that was necessary. Having said that, look, the most important thing with Iran is, like North Korea, we've got to confront an Iran that is trying to support terrorism in that part of the world, supports instability, supports Hezbollah, is involved in Iran, in Syria now, fighting with the Russians, continues to be a destabilizing force in that region. We have to be willing to make very clear that Iran cannot continue to do that. And at the same time, look, everybody has, certain objections about the nuclear deal that was put on the table. But there were 5 other nations that joined the United States in putting that deal together. And I think at this stage of the game, while you may not like, I don't particularly like the idea that it allows within a period of time for Iran to go back to build nuclear weapons. But there is an interim period where they're required not to develop a nuclear weapon. And I don't think we ought to throw that out the window. That's something we ought to continue working with other countries to try to enforce. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that we ought to back away from allowing Iran to continue these other steps that are necessary. I think, frankly, the thing that we haven't done very effectively is to build a strong working coalition of other countries in that region. The moderate Arab countries, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Jordan, Turkey, Israel, we ought to have a working coalition because they all feel the same concerns about Iran. They have the same concerns about ISIS, the same concerns about terrorism. And frankly, that kind of working coalition, I think, would be very effective militarily to deal with the challenges in that part of the world, A. And B, we need to have a coalition that can provide a support system for some of these failed states. The problem is we go in, we defeat ISIS or defeat terrorism, we leave, and instability goes back in. We've got to develop a support system that provides some kind of stability for countries like Libya, for countries like Egypt, for countries like Yemen. Those are areas, frankly, in which we don't have, a strong approach as to what we're going to do. Well, once we've been able to establish some degree of peace in that part of the world. So I think what a new president needs to do is to establish a strong working coalition in the Middle East to confront Iran, but to also confront ISIS and the other threats in the Middle East.
When you say ISIS, this fascinates me because, yes, it takes me back. It seems to me Desert Storm was the last time there was even anything that we thought at the time was victory over an objective. Mm-hmm. It just hasn't happened since then. And what strikes me about ISIS, when you cover the Pentagon, you hear all the discussion about defeating ISIS in Iraq, defeating ISIS in Syria. But of course, we all know that neither of those things, and the Pentagon as well knows this, of course, neither nor Iraq or Syria defeats ISIS, defeats violent extremism. What would your analysis, your advice be? Where would you go from here on trying to contain, if not defeat, the threat multilaterally around, on a more global basis of violent extremism?
I think our number one priority has to be is to rebuild America's military capability, to adopt once again the basic fundamental consensus that we had for 75 years on a bipartisan basis between Republican and Democrat alike, that the United States had to be the leader in the free world. We had to have first-rate military capability, better than anybody else's, bar none, and the willingness to use it periodically when it was necessary. And I think that consensus, frankly, didn't carry into the Obama administration. I think President Obama had a different worldview. And I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done to go back and rebuild that kind of capability, for example, that we called on when it was time to do Desert Storm. We had a magnificent performance by a first-rate military. We'd had significant investment in it over the years. We ended up with a $60 billion war that only cost us $5 billion because everybody else chipped in. And it was a great success. We've fallen away from that, a long ways away from it, and we're in a situation now where we're going to have to invest now and provide the leadership to persuade the American people it's absolutely necessary that we can, in fact, restore America's place in the world as the preeminent power, and that our allies can trust us and our adversaries need to fear us. And we've got a lot of work to do before we get there.
I don't disagree with what Dick said with regards to the need to establish strength with regards to our military and send the signals to the world that will exercise world leadership. But understand that You want to know what the greatest the threat is to our national security? It's the dysfunction in Washington. It's the dysfunction in Washington. And very frankly, there's a lot of blame to go around for both sides when it comes to the dysfunction in Washington. The President and the Congress and the leadership of the Congress on both sides have been unable to come together when it comes to major issues facing this country, whether it's the budget, whether it's immigration reform, whether it's dealing with energy, whether it's dealing with war authority. They haven't been able to do it. They're dysfunctional. And, you know, nothing's going to happen here unless that dysfunction is broken down. And unless the leadership in the Congress, working with the new president, is willing to sit down and deal with these issues, you know, we're not going to have a strong defense if they aren't willing to negotiate what exactly are we going to do with regards to the budget? What are we going to do in terms of our defense goals for the future? That has to be done pursuant to what we do best in a democracy. We govern. We haven't governed for a hell of a long time.
Nelson, excuse me, Leon, everything's okay now. We Republicans are in charge. Okay?
You dreamer, you.
But that was actually my question. You stole it. So sure, yes, you have Republican control across the board. That does well, both of you, as former members of the House, explain a little politics to me here. Does that mean they can do whatever they want? They don't need to regard the Democrats? Does that now put a burden on the Republicans that they have not had with the Democratic White House, because they could always point the finger at the White House and say, well, there's the problem? So what are we really looking at here?
Well, I think, you know, if I go back, and Leon and I talked about some of this today, we go back to back in the day.
Back in the day.
But when I was Secretary of Defense, my #1 ally on Capitol Hill was Jack Murtha.
You bet.
Democrat from Pennsylvania, chairman of the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee. And Jack would come down at the beginning of every session, and we'd have breakfast in my office at the Pentagon, and we'd get out a piece of paper. And on one side, we had all the stuff he had to have. And on the other side, we had all the stuff I had to have. And that basically was the structure of the bill. On a bipartisan basis. He once took a multi-$100 billion defense bill to the floor and passed it under suspension of the rules, no vote, no amendments, 20 minutes of debate. Yeah. Now, I don't know that we can ever go back to that point. Jack Murtha's dead, and I'm no longer in office. Leon and I are well qualified now to tell them how they should have done it. But no, there's no question about what. There's been a deadlock, that there's plenty of blame to go around. I'd prefer, though, to say we've got a fresh start. We've got a new president. We've got a unified Congress from the standpoint of the House and Senate. Ultimately, obviously, the Democrats can, if they want, filibuster and create problems. We've got to find ways to be able to work together going forward. But I think what you really need, my own personal view, is right up front, is a very strong presidential leadership, and work with the Congress to get them on board as well, too. And I think many of them are already there. We absolutely have to have as our #1 priority our U.S. military capability, our national security policy, our role in the world. And we've got to come to agreement on that and put the resources against the problem to make it a reality. And all the other debates and so forth are interesting, but they're irrelevant until we solve that problem.
He's going to, look, a new president is going to run into what all presidents run into, which is smack dab into the wall of checks and balances. Our forefathers designed it that way. They didn't want to put power in a president. They didn't want to centralize power in a president. They didn't want to centralize power in a king parliament. And they didn't want to put power in a star chamber court. That's why they developed this remarkable system of checks and balances that served our country for over 200 years. But it can be frustrating as hell. It can also be a formula for gridlock. And that's what we've experienced over these last few years, is gridlock. I mean, you know, at the time, I remember when I was chief of staff to Bill Clinton, and the House went Republican and the Senate went Republican. You know, the whole point was, all right, can we work out some basis to negotiate here so we can try to resolve some issues? First thing we ran into was the budget battle. And I can remember negotiating late into the night in the Oval Office, and you know, we came up with the last offer, and you know, the decision was not to accept that offer, and government gets shut down. And all hell breaks loose, and the Republicans suddenly realize this is not the right way to do it. And to the credit of Speaker Gingrich at the time, he said it might be better maybe if we try to negotiate with a new president. And they did. And we were able to get welfare reform, we got budgets done, we did a whole series of things working together. And I think somehow we've got to get back to that process. And even though it's a Republican president and a Republican House and a Republican Senate, you know damn well in dealing with the membership on both the House and Senate side that they can basically dig in on any issue, Republicans and Democrats. That's the nature of our system. You're dealing with 535 members. You know, some are honest, some are dishonest, some are smart, some are stupid, some are crooks. You know, that's the nature of democracy. Welcome to democracy. And that's, you know, you can't walk away from that. You know, presidents can be disgusted by it, but they've got to deal with it. That's how we govern in this country. You know, Abraham Lincoln had to basically bribe people to pass the 13th Amendment. You know, I can remember going through that process with Bill Clinton. We had a war room, and we had to basically negotiate with every damn member, try to get them to vote the right way. And they did the same thing. That's the nature of governing. That's what you have to do. And if you think you can suddenly stand up and, you know, in a pompous way say, this is what ought to happen, and then not roll up your sleeves and go to work, it ain't going to happen. It ain't going to happen. You know, governing is a kick-ass process. It's the nature of it. And it means you've got to roll up your sleeves and engage in that process. So, you know, if a Donald Trump is willing to do that, working not just with the Republican leadership, but with Democratic leadership, and building coalitions around issues, and I think you can. I think you can probably develop a coalition around funding infrastructure, for God's sakes. It's something everybody agrees to. Why not put that together? Why not get it, you know, through the Congress on a bipartisan basis? Why not do some kind of immigration reform on a bipartisan basis? Why not do something on the budget to try to establish an approach not only to reforming entitlements, but reforming taxes? Those are opportunities, but it isn't just going to happen. We've gotten to a stage where, you know, look, in our day, governing was good politics. Understand? Governing was good politics. And if we governed, we went back to our districts, the fact that we could govern and get things done was in our political benefit. I'm not sure that people think that governing is good politics now. That's the problem. Stopping things was good politics on both sides. Somehow we've got to change that mentality and get both Republicans and Democrats and a new president sitting down in the same room and negotiating and compromising and getting things done. That's what the American people want to know. If we all know the American people were angry and frustrated as hell. And you know why? Because of the dysfunction in Washington. Because both Democrats and Republicans were promising all kinds of things that they never delivered on. And if they can't break that gridlock and we go through another 4 years, watch how angry and frustrated the American people will be in 4 years.
We have just a few minutes left, and I couldn't let this panel, both of you gentlemen, go by without bringing the people equation, the soldier marine equation, the human equation into this discussion. One of the things, just as a journalist, I'm so struck by is, and I think many people in this room may know it, but if you don't, you really need to read up on this. President George W. Bush really has made such a commitment in retirement to America's wounded troops and America's wounded veterans. It is clearly something he has very personal, very deep, very emotional feelings about. And it's pretty awesome to see that kind of commitment. It's not something he has to do. He feels it and he does it. And I believe Mrs. Bush accompanies him in this effort. I don't even know in particular, in front of all of you, I don't even know what the question exactly is, but what strikes me is we're 15 years beyond 9/11 as someone who was in the building that day. You now have young troops joining who were what, maybe 3 or 4 years old on that day. You have a generation beyond that. Just talk to us for a minute about the human side of this, that we have this generation of wounded Americans. We have new young troops coming in. They don't join I don't think they join because of politics. I don't think they join the military because they're Democrats or Republicans. What is the obligation of presidents and defense secretaries to them, all of them, in the years ahead?
Well, I thought Chairman General Dunford did an effective job today of talking about how enormously valuable that resource is. When you've been through the process and you're civilian leadership at the Pentagon or working with the military, I always, as I look back on all the various jobs I had, that was far and away the best because of the people that I got to deal with, because of the caliber of the men and women who were willing to serve. It's just an enormous resource we have as a nation, the fact that we've got literally hundreds of thousands, millions if necessary, who are willing to sign up and go in harm's way on behalf of the rest of us. And we have an obligation, especially those of us who've served in government. I'm no longer an office holder, obviously, but we have an obligation to provide them the resources they need to do the job we ask them to do for us, and not to let the gridlock, if you will, as Leon talks about it, bog us down to the point where we're now sitting around with this thing called a sequester, and every year we go out there and we take a meat-axe approach to the defense budget. It's what, 17% of the defense budget, and it's 50% of the cuts. And all of that, the troops that aren't trained, the equipment that's not kept up to date, the maintainers that are needed to keep the Marine Corps F-18s flying. I mean, go through the whole list. We're failing as a country if we don't provide them with the resources to do what they need to do and want to do on behalf of all of us. It falls on all of us. And I think that especially those of us on the political side of the business are obligated to find a way to get it done, because we're in a situation where, as I say, and I think nearly everybody I've talked to at this conference agrees, the threats are rising, and we're going to have to move heaven and earth to make certain that we always stay ahead of that, and that we can, in fact, deliver. And it's to those young men and women who sign up and go in harm's way for all of us that we have an obligation to. It's not,
I agree with Dick. The proudest moments I had as Secretary of Defense was having a chance to look into the eyes of our men and women in uniform who were out there. Whether it was Iraq, whether it was Afghanistan, whether it was other tough posts that they had around the world. And you look into their eyes, and having 3 sons, you look into their eyes and you see the fact that here are young men and women who are willing to put their lives on the line for our country. They're willing to fight and die for our country. They don't ask a hell of a lot of questions. They're willing to do what's necessary to protect our country. And I've often asked myself, my God, if these are young men and women who are willing to put their lives on the line in order to protect this country, why the hell can't people who are elected to office use a little bit of that courage in order to govern the country and take the risks necessary to govern the country? Because these men and women are prepared to do that. And they are, when we talk about the strength of our military, and I know we've got great weapon systems, we've got great technology, we've got great capabilities. It isn't worth a damn without the men and women who are the warriors for this country and who are willing to go into battle and do what's necessary. And I think we do owe them the ability to support them, to make sure they have the finest equipment, that they have the finest support that they can have in order to do battle. But more importantly, to also support them and support their families, to make sure that their families have decent housing, have a good education, that they have the ability to, because they sacrifice a hell of a lot for those that are on active duty, to support their families, and then also to support them when they leave the military and become veterans. I mean, too often once they leave, we kind of forget the sacrifice that's necessary. If we're going to be true to our men and women in uniform, it has to be continual. We've got to support them not only when they're in their military, but also support them when they're facing some of the tough challenges of being a veteran in this country. If we do that, then I think the United States can always be comforted in knowing that we have the strongest military on the face of the earth.
Let me, I'm noting that the clock says 000 behind us, and so that's a big sign. But let me wrap up by 5 seconds of saying this. Both of these gentlemen, when serving as Secretary of Defense, embraced a long, very rich tradition of talking to the Pentagon press corps. Stop laughing. Trying to say something nice here. No, seriously, they both embraced a very, and set a real tone of talking to the press corps, explaining national defense policy, taking us on trips into some pretty interesting places overseas with them, letting us see everything they could about what they were doing, and letting us have the access to report on troops across the world. It was so important. Journalism is not tweeting, and I think everyone in the press corps is looking forward to see what comes next. We hope the next Secretary of Defense, I think he will have the same. But it just today gives me an opportunity that I've never had to say thank you to both of you for that, because it's on behalf of the whole Pentagon press corps. Really, it's so important. It's probably never was your favorite thing to do, to come down to the briefing room, but it is appreciated, and we thank you, really, all of us do.
Thank you.